I'm John Razian, director at the Hoover Institution. It's a great pleasure to have you come on a Saturday, or I'm sorry, what day is it? Wednesday afternoon, and wondered how you found that parking experience today. I hope it was okay. So it's a pleasure to welcome our keynote address of the California Public Pension Solutions Conference. Today's discussion brought together not only Hoover Fellows, but also scholars from across the country, current and former policy leaders from California as well as out of state, and pension reform specialists to discuss in-depth solutions to California's public pension challenges. It was a full day of vigorous discussion, and our keynote address is Mayor Chuck Reed of San Jose. I'm pleased to welcome the mayor back to the Hoover Institution. Recently, we hosted Mayor Reed for a roundtable discussion with Hoover's Fellowship, and I'm glad he has returned to again address today's conversation. This conference was focused solely on solutions to one of California's most daunting problems. Mayor Reed has been at the forefront of pension solutions during his tenure in San Jose, and I couldn't think of anyone better to address us this afternoon on turning pension solutions into action. As you know, our esteemed colleague George Schultz wrote a book titled Ideas and Action, and we as Hoover Fellows really subscribe to that kind of combination. It's not just the ideas, which we consider ourselves as idea generators, but it's putting ideas in action as best we can through finding the kinds of leaders that can actually make a difference. Chuck Reed was elected the 64th mayor of San Jose on November 7, 2006. As mayor, he has been committed to improving the quality of life in the city. He's boosted the public's trust in local government, and he has eliminated the city's structural budget deficit. Mayor Reed was reelected in June of 2010 with 77% of the vote. In 2012, he successfully pushed for a compromise set of pension reforms approved by nearly 70% of San Jose voters, which will protect the long-term health of the city's retirement plans and generate the savings necessary to begin restoring core services in the community. Prior to being elected mayor, he represented District 4 on the San Jose City Council between 2000 and 2006. As council member, he became an independent voice on the city council and gained a reputation for his commitment to fiscal responsibility. If only our nation would sort of subscribe to those ideals. Mayor Reed attended the United States Air Force Academy and went on to serve in Thailand during the Vietnam War. He received a master's degree in public affairs from Princeton University and graduated from Stanford Law School. So please join me in giving a warm welcome to Mayor Chuck Reed.
Thank you. Thank you. It's always great to be back at Stanford, although I hardly recognize the place compared to what it was when I was here in law school. But it's good to be here. Last week I spent most of the week in Washington, D.C. as part of a Silicon Valley Leadership Group trip to lobby Congress on particularly immigration reform and corporate tax reform. But of course, the government was shut down. There were still lots of people in Congress to talk to, but a lot of the talk was about Obamacare, the Affordable Care Act, and why the government was being shut down. So even though this is a conference about pension reform, I think, hey, we shut down the federal government over health care. Maybe I should say something about health care reform. So I just want to tell you a personal story about health care in my family. My mother and father are born and raised in Mississippi, in rural Mississippi. They didn't have a lot of money. The economy was mostly around cotton, working in the cotton fields. My grandfather on my mother's side had a small farm, and they grew almost all of their food. When they were married in 1947, neither family had money, and the biggest wedding present they got was from my grandfather, and it was a pig. He had a farm, here's a pig, it's a big deal. So that was the best wedding present they got. A year later, I was born, and they still didn't have money, and they didn't have a health care plan. So they sold the pig to pay for me. And thus was born the Little Piggy Goes to Market health care plan. Now, I'm not suggesting that that ought to be added into the Affordable Care Act, but it might work for some people in some circumstances if they happen to own a farm. You get married, you get a pig, and you can sell it to pay for your children. So I just offer that as a modest solution to the Affordable Care Act, and hoping of breaking the logjam in Congress. But there was good news that came out of that. The good news is I was named Charles Rufus Reed for my grandfather, Charles Rufus Robinson. I'm just glad that they didn't name me for the pig. Otherwise, I'd be speaking to you today as Mayor Porky. So I'm happy to be here as Mayor Reed of San Jose, the 10th largest city in the country, capital of Silicon Valley, the innovation center of the world. But I'm here talking about pension reform, and I think I first have to answer the question of why a Democratic mayor with a Democratic council in a heavily Democratic city in a heavily Democratic state would take on pension reform over the objections of all 11 of our public employee unions. And the short answer is the alternatives were worse. After a decade of cutting services, laying off firefighters, laying off police officers, closing libraries, closing community centers, continuing to do nothing was a lot worse than the trials and tribulations of health care reform. But this is a problem all across the state of California. It's not just the city of San Jose that has a problem due to skyrocketing retirement cuts. All across the state, services are being crowded out. Infrastructure is not being paid for. Roads are deteriorating. Libraries, community centers, public safety is all suffering due to skyrocketing pension costs. And even as the California economy continues to recover and tax revenues grow, we're grateful for that, our state and local governments are still struggling to keep up even with the improving economy. And that's because these skyrocketing retirement costs continue to crowd out funding for anything and everything else in the budget. Now, during my 6+ years as mayor of the city of San Jose, I've spent a lot of time, enormous amount of energy, trying to solve this massive problem. In all of my work on pension reform, I have two premises that I start with. First, governments have a responsibility to provide essential services that protect the safety, the health, and the welfare and quality of life enjoyed by California residents. The second is that governments also have an obligation to ensure that their retirement plans are sustainable and it can meet the commitments made to the employees. Thus, there are two equally important objectives, I believe, and we have worked into everything that I'm doing with pension reform. Make sure the employees get paid and the retirees get paid what they've earned. Provide reasonable services to residents and taxpayers. But the rising costs of California's current public benefit system are threatening our ability to achieve either of those goals. The fuse was lit on this current crisis back in 1999 with the passage of SB 400, which granted retroactive increases to state employees of large amounts, like 50% increase. Now, you may remember at the time, those of you who are here, that CalPERS claimed that this could be done without it costing a dime of additional taxpayer money. That is a quote. This encouraged many local governments to follow suit. Of course, that CalPERS prediction turned out to be dead wrong, and we've been paying the price ever since. According to the state controller's annual reports, it's not me talking, this is a controller talking, taxpayer contributions into public employee pension plans across the state have jumped from $3 billion, $3.4 billion in fiscal year 2000, 2001, to $17 billion in fiscal year 10, 11. That's slightly more than a dime. The comptroller also reported there's at least $150 billion in unfunded pension liabilities in the state. And of course, that number is likely much larger, many times larger, when more realistic assumptions are used. But of course, there's even more bad news in the future. CalPERS has stated that pension contributions for CalPERS agencies, and there's hundreds of them, will go up by 50% over the next 7 years. The state retirement system for teachers, CalSTRS, also recently stated it needs another $4.5 billion annually to reach full funding in 30 years. And of course, those figures assume, optimistically, that the retirement funds will hit their 7.5% rate of return every year, year after year after year. Now, I'm not the only one deeply concerned about the state's pension problems. The California Government Reform Agency, Little Hoover Commission, issued a report in February of 2011 that they called Public Pensions for Retirement Security. And they said California's pension plans are dangerously underfunded, the result of overly generous benefit promises, wishful thinking, and unwillingness to plan prudently. Unless aggressive reforms are taken now, the problem will get far worse, forcing counties and cities to severely reduce services and lay off employees to meet pension obligations. Of course, we've seen that coming true all over the state. And 4 years ago, a person who was then CalPERS chief actuary, Ron Sealing, declared that the cost of public employee retirement benefits is unsustainable. Now, this is a problem that all Californians should care about. It's draining money away from core public services. It's increasing pressure for new taxes and steeper borrowing. It's preventing much-needed investments in infrastructure. And it threatens to leave our children and grandchildren with an enormous debt that they won't be able to afford. For example, in San Jose, our annual retirement contribution more than tripled over the past decade and now consumes more than 20% of the city's entire general fund. Those increases have forced us to lay off police officers and firefighters, closing libraries and community centers, and we'll watch our streets deteriorate year after year because the funding is substantially less than it should be. These unsustainable costs of retirement benefits should be a serious concern for government employees as well. Many employees around the state have already faced layoffs and pay cuts due to rising retirement costs. In addition, huge unfunded liabilities threaten the government's ability to pay out the benefits that our public employees will be counting on when they retire. That's what happened in Stockton. They had to eliminate health care for coverage for its retirees. Central Falls, Rhode Island, they're forced to slash pension payments to retirees by 50%. Nobody wants to see that happen in California. I'm particularly concerned about our teachers. These are the people who've dedicated their lives to educating our children, our grandchildren, who nurture and inspire every single day, and providing the next generation with the skills to succeed in life. Our teachers deserve the security of knowing that their pension system will be there for them, not just the day they retire, but when they hopefully grow to 85 or 90 years old. Yet last month, the State Teachers Fund, CalSTRS, reported this plan is only 45% funded under the new GASB standards. And CalSTRS' own actuaries say the plan is projected to run out of money in 30 years. And that's well within the lifetime of our current teachers and our recently retired teachers. Our residents and our public servants deserve better treatment than that. We have a responsibility to provide our residents with vital services that protect and enhance the quality of life here in California. Our residents deserve to know that when they call 911, somebody will respond. They deserve to know that their children will receive a quality education at school. And we owe it to our government employees to maintain a fiscally sound and sustainable pension system that will be able to pay out the benefits they've earned over their careers. Our teachers, police officers, firefighters, and all of our other dedicated public servants deserve to have that kind of security in retirement. Right now, we can't make those guarantees. I think Governor Brown said it best in short words, as he usually does. Well, maybe not long words, short sentences. Pension reform can be hard to talk about, But in the long run, reform now means fewer demands for layoffs and less draconian measures in the future. It's in the best interest of all Californians to fix this system now. Governor Brown has also said that more needs to be done, and I agree with that. While the legislation passed, they call it PEPRA, in 2012 was a step in the right direction, most of the savings are far out in the future. And by CalPERS' own calculation, only cover about 5 to 10% of the state's unfunded pension liabilities. Voter surveys show that the people strongly support pension reform and don't believe that the state legislation fixed the problem. So what do we need to do to fix the problem? After my years in office of analyzing the unsustainable costs, identifying solutions, and then attempting to negotiate and implement solutions, I've learned a few lessons. First, the central problem is that these generous retirement benefits are too expensive. The government cannot afford to pay for them. The employees cannot afford to pay for them. The only solution to the problem is to reduce the costs of the benefits. Secondly, you can't reduce the cost of the benefits by changing actuarial assumptions. It took me a long time to learn that because everybody wants to talk about the actuarial assumptions. You can't do it that way. The benefits cost what the benefits cost, and you have to pay for them. It doesn't matter what assumptions you've made. When the bill comes due, the bill is due. Now, of course, you can create a disaster with the wrong actuarial assumptions, as we've seen in California over the last decade or so. The third thing I learned was that to generate immediate savings, you have to address current employees. In fact, both the Little Hoover Commission and the Legislative Analyst's Office have confirmed that California cannot solve its pension problems without including current employees in the pension reform, something the state legislature didn't really take on in 2012. And time is of the essence. If we act now, we can preserve what people have earned and accrued. So they get to keep what's already in the bank. But we have to act now. The longer we wait, the more difficult and dangerous it gets. We have to go further than the legislature did in 2012. We have to make changes, and we have to make them on a going forward basis. We don't have to reach back retroactively if we act now. Unfortunately, in California, that's much easier said than done. While federal law allows and requires private sector pension plans to prospectively change employee benefits under certain circumstances, more than a dozen states allow prospective changes to public pension plans. There's language in some California court decisions which suggests that we cannot do the same for public pensions in our state. This is the so-called California rule of vested rights, a rule that's been widely used across the state by our public employee unions to block even the most modest of pension reforms. And this is a rule that must be changed if we're going to be able to solve our problems. And that's why over the last year or so I've been advocating for a constitutional amendment to the California Constitution that would do several things. First, we need to explicitly allow governments to modify pension benefits or increase employees' contributions in future collective bargaining agreements for future years of service, while protecting the benefits as they are earned. Second, we have to enable the people of California to take actions at the ballot box if necessary to provide fiscally responsible and adequately funded retirement benefits for all government employees and retirees, and to provide reasonable services to residents and taxpayers. We need to provide clear authority to local governments and the state to exercise their ability to protect essential government services and address serious retirement benefit costs and underfunding issues in a manner that's consistent with the United States Constitution. Equally important is what we don't have to do. And I'm not proposing or suggesting that anything that would allow governments to change benefits that employees have already earned and accrued for work performed. We don't have to do that if we act now. This is exactly what the Little Hoover Commission determined was needed in its 2011 report. Public agencies must have flexibility and authority to freeze accrued pension benefits for current workers and to make pension changes going forward to protect state and local public employees and the public good. A constitutional amendment is necessary to settle the ongoing dispute over the vested rights doctrine, the California rule, and that amendment is necessary if we're going to succeed, for 3 reasons. First, the government leaders need to be able to generate immediate savings to offset the huge cost increases coming in the next few years. Absent clear constitutional authority to do that, to prospectively reform benefits, many governments have opted to only address benefits for new employees. We've seen that over and over again. But that doesn't provide significant savings for years, and many cities can't afford to wait. This constitutional amendment would help cities and government agencies across the state avoid costly and time-consuming litigation. As I said, the vested rights doctrine is being used to challenge even the most modest of changes. And public employee unions have used the vested rights doctrine arguments to challenge even things that are prohibited under the law. Like in Contra Costa County, they're using the vested rights doctrine to try to protect their right to spike their pay and their benefits in their last year of service. That's been prohibited by California law since probably about 1937. But they've been doing it, and so now they have a vested right to continue doing it. That's in litigation. This amendment would also provide additional options for bringing down retirement costs. Current debate over vested rights has left many government agencies in a fallback position of making their employees pay more into their pensions. It's true, it does save the government money, but the government can't afford these benefits at their real cost, and the employees can't afford to pay the benefits, the true costs of these really generous benefits. When given a choice, and it would be nice to be able to give employees a choice, many employees would prefer a more modest retirement plan rather than see their take-home pay reduced. Now, some people have argued that pension reform and pension problems will be solved once the stock market recovers. But it'll take double-digit investment returns for many years in a row to eliminate the unfunded liabilities in California's retirement system and cover the rapidly rising contributions that will be required in the years ahead. As Warren Buffett put it, it's that kind of overly optimistic Alice in Wonderland thinking that got us in trouble in the first place. Of course, others have argued that we should issue pension obligation bonds or some other form of borrowing, or modify actuarial assumptions to delay cost increases. But those are just gimmicks. They'll cost us more in the long run, place an even greater burden on our children, and increase the risk of our retirement systems becoming insolvent. Without fundamental reform, skyrocketing retirement costs and massive unfunded liabilities that we already see push more cities, counties, school districts, and ultimately the state towards a fiscal disaster. But if we act now with a constitutional amendment, we can provide all levels of government with clear authority to modify the terms of current employees' future benefit accruals, allowing us to preserve public services and ensure that our employees get paid what they've earned. We want our employees to get paid what they've earned, and we want to provide services to our residents and taxpayers. That's all we're trying to do. It's easier said than done. This is California. It is not easy. It will not be easy. And I want to thank all the many people that have participated today in the symposium who are working on this issue, many of whom have been working on it much longer than I have. And the trouble does not go away, but we'll keep working on it. And I look forward to continue to work with many of you on this issue. And as we move into the process of trying to amend our Constitution, I'm sure we'll have many other opportunities to talk. And with that, I want to thank you all for coming. Thank you for allowing me to speak. And we'll have some time for questions, and I might even have time for some answers. But thank you. We have a microphone, traveling microphone, so that people can hear the question. It's in the back, so just, okay, so we have one on each side. So let's start closest there in the back.
Thank you.
I think it takes a second for it to kick in.
Thank you. Where are we in the process of this constitutional amendment, and when do we think it might end up on the ballot?
Well, I've been working on it for probably a year, drafting, talking to people, and I hope that we'll be in a position to file for title and summary in a few days. Keeping open the option of 2014 ballot measure, November of 2014, or maybe 2016. And the whether to go in 14 or 16 is really a political call, depending upon the circumstances. But we're trying to keep that option open so we could do it in November of 14. I'd like to do it in November of 14, because the sooner we do it, the easier it is to solve our problems.
First of all, I'd like to offer you the opportunity of becoming a Republican. My second question has
I wasn't born a Democrat, but John F. Kennedy.
You can't become one. My question has to do with the San Jose pension environment. What percentage of your obligations are funded, and are they all defined benefit plans, or are some of them defined contribution plans?
We have nearly $3 billion of unfunded liabilities and a combination of pension benefits and health care benefits. We have 2 independent plans. We appoint the members, but they make their own decisions, hire their own actuaries. And so the health care costs and the pension costs are split 2 ways. So, but in aggregate, about $3 billion. We do not have a defined contribution system. So our liabilities are all in the defined benefits, both for health care and for pension, about $3 billion. Now, the level of funding, percentage of funding fluctuates between 60 and 80, depending upon what assumptions you make. Under the new GASB rules, we're going to be at a lower percentage of funding, and whether it's 60 or 80, we don't have all the money we should have, and our costs are skyrocketing. If just in real dollars, you don't have to get into the actuarial assumptions or the projections. You don't have to argue about what might happen in 10 years. Just look what's happened in the last 10 years and where we are today, and the costs have gone up enormously. It consumes more than 20% of our general fund. And the contribution levels based on salary, depending whether you're police officer, firefighter, or federated, are somewhere between, this is the total cost, right? We're talking about total cost. Your employees share, and our employees do pay a share, and the city's share for police and fire is up around 90% of salary. In addition to salary, another 90% goes to pay for health and pension benefits, and we're not yet paying the full annual required contribution for health care. We're creeping up on it. So the costs are going to continue to go up. That's what the actuaries tell me. Over here.
The average age of a public employee's retirement is what, 55? Can't that be changed?
Well, that goes to the California vested rights rule. Everything could be changed, everything will be challenged, and everything has to stand up to the standards set by the courts unless we change the Constitution. That is one of the things that cities ought to be able to change. There's really only about 3 variables. One is the annual percentage that you get for a year of service work, ranges between 2% and 3%. You could modify that. COLAs that are paid to retirees, and then the age of retirement. Those are pretty much it, or you can make the employees pay more. So the things that you need to change to fix the system, there's really a small universe of that. But changing any of those runs into this vested right argument. So in San Jose, what we did in 2012 was to go to a ballot. You got 70% yes, and the ballot measure provided that our current employees would have to pay more for their benefits, a lot more, a 16% additional amount for their benefits. But we want to give them a choice because we know that's a really heavy burden, because that'll put them up, some of them around in excess of 30% total. That's a heavy burden. We know they can't afford to pay it. And so we want to give them a choice of going for a lower, less costly, more modest retirement program, still a defined benefit plan, but at a lower cost, to give them a choice to do that. So that's part of what we're trying to implement. We have 7 actions filed in Superior Court and 6 or 7 complaints filed at the Public Employees Relations Board, PERB, trying to stop what we're doing. So we're still in the implementation phase. But to your question about when people retire, in San Jose, the average police officer and firefighter, we have what's called a 3% at 50, some modification, so you could theoretically retire at a 90% of salary at age 50. That doesn't happen very often. The sort of average retirement is about age 54, and with about 28 years of service. And the reason that happens is because that's the date in which people can make more money by staying home than they can by coming to work. And you have to expect when you reach that point, people are probably going to retire. And so that's typically where our public safety employees retire. Our other employees, the federated employees, have a lower level of benefits, longer years of service, but still it's a relatively young age that people can retire. Other questions? I think that was the last hand. Okay. Oh, one more up here, I'm sorry.
Even with the constitutional amendment, don't you have to break what I would call the corrupt relationship between the politician and the unions, where they reward their friends and they punish their enemies? And so the politicians are likely to go along with whatever the union wants?
Well, those are political issues and political problems, and they play out in every jurisdiction across the state in different ways. In terms of a constitutional amendment, I don't think we want to be prescriptive about how each jurisdiction goes about solving their problems, because I want an amendment that can be supported by mayors. Being a mayor, I talked to a lot of mayors, and I've worked on trying to draft something that mayors could support. Mayors would appreciate the ability to negotiate or the ability to go to the voters to do whatever they need for their city. So the proposed initiative is not going to be prescriptive in setting retirement age or accrual rates or percentages, because it's going to be different across the city. Now, of course, since we're not making people do something, there will be cities that don't do anything. And those are political issues. And those will have to be addressed. So this is not the end of the problem. It is the beginning by allowing people to have the power to fix the problem. And two things. One is it can be negotiated, but we also want to protect and guarantee that the people have a right by ballot initiative to solve the problem. And so if there are circumstances where the elected officials don't want to deal with it for whatever reason, we're trying to make sure that the people, through ballot measures like in San Jose and San Diego, can do that.
What lessons have you taken away from previous attempts at pension reform, specifically ballot measures?
Well, I've learned a lot about some of them. Lesson number one is the public is way ahead of the politicians, that the public is supportive of pension reform, and I've seen a lot of polls, and we've done a few polls, and pretty much whatever you want to do in the elements of pension reform is 60% yes and 20% no. So the public is very supportive. The public understands it. The public gets it. And they see the crowding out of services at the local level. So that's really important to know that the public is there. The second is that it's very difficult to get to the ballot because the public employee unions don't want to go to the ballot. And the big fight is whether or not you can get it on the ballot. Once you're on the ballot, the public will be there. The other lesson is the one about being prescriptive or not. And while I can sit down and design what a plan should look like, what the benefits should be, and all the variables, I can't really make that decision for every other mayor in the state. And so empowering the mayors to deal with the problems and empowering the voters to deal with the problems is a very strong political statement. And so that's the way we're crafting the ballot measure. But getting it to the people, getting it on the ballot is the big challenge. And that takes time, effort, energy, and money. In a state like California, it takes a lot of all of those. Last chance. I know I'm standing between you and cocktails. It's a dangerous place to be, so I want to thank you all for coming out here, and thanks for giving me a chance to talk.